I really love finding creative ways to use my supplies, and in today's video I'm going to share with you how you can take a stencil with a pretty basic shape and how you can take it up a notch. Hi everyone, it's Laura Volpes, and in today's video I'm going to share with you how to create your own DIY plaid background using a stencil and just a few extra supplies. The first thing you want to do is to add some color to the background, and you're going to use your stencil to create this little grid pattern. This grid stencil is a great basics and will work on a variety of cards, and I thought it would be fun to show you a way in which you can stretch its use and create something different with it. What I'm using here to do my blending are my distress oxides in the colors Crackling Campfire and then Aged Mahogany just around the edges, and it is important that you use some sort of pigmenting for this technique because you want to be able to cover the craft cardstock that you have under the stencil. This is how your background will look after this first step. And then what you want to do at this point is to take a gold jelly roll pen and use a ruler to basically fill in those areas that are left blank. So you're going to go over the lines that are left in between the grid using a ruler if you want your lines to be super straight, or you can freehand this if you like, and this will give a bit more of a whimsical touch to the card. And basically you're just going to do this on the horizontal lines and on the vertical lines that you have here on this grid. It may seem a little bit tedious, but it's actually pretty quick and easy. Once you're done with your gold jelly roll pen, you're going to move on to a black fine liner, and in this case we are going to draw lines which are slightly shifted with respect to the lines of the grid. So you are going to basically overlap your lines a little bit with those squares that you have on the grid, and you're going to draw a line every other grid line. So there are basically 2 squares in between each of these black lines. I hope this is clear, and I'm sure that the images will describe the process probably even better than I am, but if you do have questions, make sure to leave them in the description box down below. Here is your DIY plaid background. You can go a little bit bolder than I did if you wanted to. You can really experiment with this, but I think it is a very fun idea for your card backgrounds. Alright, now that the background is done, it's time to move on and keep working to create this beautiful fall card. I have a die cut heart here. This is some watercolor cardstock by Spectrum Noir, and I used the fancy heart scallop dies by Studio Katia to create this panel. I'm going to do again some very quick ink blending with my distress oxides, and I started with Speckle Dag. I used it to coat the entire surface, and then I am coming in with chipped sapphire on the edges of the heart to create a little bit of an ombre effect. These blending brushes make it very easy to get that soft fade from one color into another, and then once that panel is done, I can move on and work on my focal point. I used the Shaker Pumpkin die by Studio Katia to die cut some Nina Solar White 110 pounds cardstock, and I am going to color this die cut with my Illustrator alcohol markers today. Of course, if you don't love coloring, or if you wanted this to be an even faster card, you could die cut this directly out of some colored cardstock or out of some white cardstock and doing blending with distress oxides, but I really love the look of colored die cuts when you use alcohol markers to color them in, and so this is what I went for today. Adding these brush strokes with your markers is going to create a lovely texture, which is going to make this card even more beautiful and really make the pumpkin the star of the show. I started with my lighter markers just to get an idea of where to place my lines and how to place my shadows, and I'm always trying to follow the curve of the die cut to add these brush strokes, and this way I'm going to create that nice and lovely roundness and dimension in my die cut. And then once I was confident enough with the placement of my shadows, I went in with darker markers to create that lovely contrast, which is going to give a lot of dimension to the die cut. The die cut this little frame as well, and I went around the frame too with the same markers and followed the shading that I have on the main die cut so that everything looks nice and cohesive. And you can see the marker numbers that I used on screen, and they are also listed in the blog post that you will find in the description box down below. For the stalk of the pumpkin as well as for the leaves, I'm going to use some yellow greens, and I'm going to show you the coloring just for one leaf, but I actually colored and die cut 4 of them. For my sentiment, I used the simple trimmings dies and the trimmings sayings set 1 stamp set, and I'm going to do some heat embossing over some craft cardstock. I used gold embossing powder so that it would match with the gold jelly roll pen that I used on my plaid background, and I'm also using some craft cardstock because I want to do some ink blending with distress oxides. I'm using again the same colors that I have on my background, and having again this craft cardstock base makes sure that all the colors will match nicely. Here's the sentiment banner, and I really love the look of that gold embossing powder. And then here I decided that I wanted to frame my background a little bit more, so I die cut it with one of the dies in the dotted patterns set 3 dies, and then I quickly created my card base again from some craft cardstock cut to an A2 size with the Darling ribbon and frames dies, and I decided to do some very quick ink blending with distress oxides in vintage photo and ground espresso just on the edges. Again, you can use some colored cardstock, but I think that the look of oxides, especially on fall cards, is really special, so I took the extra step. I then went ahead and adhered everything together using my Studio Katia liquid glue. As you can see, the design is pretty simple, but this beautiful pumpkin with all that texture really brings up this card, and the DIY plaid pattern on the background makes it even more fun. Here's a look at the final result. I really loved creating this card, and I think this plaid background is really fun. You can change up the colors, and this is a technique that you can put in your arsenal and use all year around for any type of card really. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to check out the ones here on screen. There is a little bit more fall and Halloween inspiration for you, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you will always be up to date with new videos from me. And as always, thank you all so much for stopping by, and have a great day.